Hello there, and welcome to the Paletteful Packs YouTube channel. My name is Alice, and today I'm going to be opening the December 2020 Paletteful Premiere Packs. So let's go ahead, open it up, and see what is inside today. Okay, so the inside is all red and green and holiday and festive, and this pack is the Golden Heavy Body Acrylic pack. So on top, I see these palette knives. Those are going to be the first thing that we pull out here. These are by Art Alternatives, and this is a set of 5 palette knives. These are in a variety of different shapes and sizes, and palette knives are so helpful because you can use them to mix your paint, but you can also use them to actually apply your paint and create texture, which is great. The next thing that I see in here is this brush. This is a Robert Simmons brush, which means it is guaranteed for life. This is a size 12. And to go along with the palette knife and brush, we have this golden gloss medium. This gloss medium is going to be great for creating glazes. Glazes are just basically really thinned down paint, and it's so helpful for doing subtle shading and adding in different tones. This also has an oil-like feel. It promotes flow and leveling, and it's also going to obviously enhance the gloss, so make it nice and shiny. The next thing in here is obviously the paints. These are golden paints, and they're going to be their heavy body acrylic paints. It looks like you are going to get 5 paints, and the colors we're going to get are benzimidazolone yellow medium. If I said that right, I'm going to be so proud of myself. Naphthol red light, ultramarine blue, permanent green light, and titanium white. These are artist quality acrylic paints. They have a smooth and buttery consistency, and there are no fillers, extenders, dyes, nothing like that. They're pigment based, and they offer excellent permanency and light fastness. And then the last thing that we have in here are some canvas panels. These canvas panels are by Art Alternatives, and we are getting 3 of them. The first one is a 5x7. The next is a 6x12, so it's definitely like longer, more of a landscape. And then the last one is an 8x10. So this is everything that you're going to get in the December 2020 Paletteful Premiere Pack. I have been wanting to work with acrylic for like so long recently, so let's make some art. Okay, so for the first piece, I decided to play around with the palette knife, and I thought that would be a really good way for me to familiarize myself with the paints and with how they mixed. I had a little snapshot of like a very like pastel muted sunset on my phone that I had saved from a long time ago that I found inspiring, so I decided to paint something based on that and just create a really textural kind of loose piece. And I had a really fun time with this. If you're a little intimidated by the acrylics, then I think this might be a really good place for you to start. It was just a really fun way for me to start figuring out how the acrylics worked, how long they took to dry, and I wasn't really stressed about making things perfect because I was using a palette knife. Also, I felt like Bob Ross, which was like definitely a bonus. The palette knife was really good for spreading on colors, and then you could kind of lift colors and scrape colors back off. And then I kind of used the tip of the palette knife to create a little bit more details. One thing that I liked when working with the palette knife was that you could build up lots of colors over the top of one another, and they would kind of peek through in areas. And I also really enjoyed that you can mix really easily on the canvas, and that's something that I like to do in watercolor, and I think it adds some visual interest and kind of like keeps things a little bit from being too static, if that makes sense. For the most part, I just used this one palette knife. I just kind of like got on a roll and just kept using it. It worked pretty well because it had like the very fine point that I could use for some more of the details in some of the cloudy areas, but then I could use the flat part to kind of almost like frost. It felt like I was frosting on the paint in more of the flat areas. So I really enjoyed myself, and I thought this was really like a fun thing to do. For this, I didn't really use much of the green. I mostly just used the blue, the red, the white, and then a little bit of the yellow for the actual like sunset that was kind of peeking through these purple clouds. And then there was a little moon in the piece, like in the photo. It was like a yellow moon. So I put that in as well. And then I just added a little bit more to the sky and the clouds and made the best attempt that I could at signing my name in a palette knife, just for, kicks and giggles, because I was like, I've done this whole thing with palette knife. I'm going to sign it with a palette knife. So that was my first piece. I think it came out really nice and I actually like it a lot. I want to do another palette knife piece. And after that, I kind of felt a little bit more warmed up and I moved on to the larger board that we got. I generally don't really like to sketch in pencil when I'm working with acrylics or oils, that kind of paint. For some reason, I just prefer to use watered down paint because most of the sketch is going to get covered up anyway, and it kind of keeps me from getting too sucked into the details. So for this piece, I decided to do a portrait, kind of a little bit more classic feeling. I gave her this kind of curly hair and this side braid, and then I put 2 flowers in her hair, and I have some references on my phone for those flowers, again from just some snapshots that I've taken. I highly recommend, if you're out and about, keep your phone with you and take little snapshots of plants and things like that, and then you build your own reference folder in your phone, and you have all these copyright free images that you can use when you need references. So it's very, very useful. I highly recommend it. So I started after the sketch by putting in the background, and I'm creating basically an underpainting. So I just started with this dark background, and then I started fleshing in the skin tones. To make the basic skin tone, I started with the yellow and the red, and then I mixed in varying degrees of white and a little bit of blue. The blue helps to dull things down and keep it from being too orange, because skin, no matter what end of the spectrum, whether it's really pale or really dark, is not going to be super, super bright and saturated in all of its areas. You want to use saturation sparingly in areas where the blood gathers, and then you can kind of dull things down and desaturate them in areas like the shadows. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now, is I'm just starting to establish where the overall planes of the face are and the shadows are going to be. I'm trying to kind of figure out the overall lighting setup. For this, I drew the face from my brain, imagination, whatever you want to call it, but I looked in the mirror that I have at my little art desk to reference the lighting. So I kind of combined real life reference with my personal sketch from my own head, and I find that that's something that's really helpful. So I definitely recommend keeping a little mirror by your desk if you have the ability to. I find it very, very useful for referencing anything really. I use that skin tone kind of as a base, and then I'll add white to add in the highlights, and then I will mix in actually some of the background color to make shadows, and then obviously I'll add in other colors to that. But that's kind of how I adjust the skin tones. I'll add in a little bit of red for more of the areas by her cheeks. I'll add in a little bit of yellow for some areas that are don't have quite as much blood under them. And that's kind of how I start the underpainting and how I start establishing my skin tones. Once the underpainting was done and dried, I took a little break and came back the next day. Then I got to work using the gloss medium that came. So this gloss medium is super useful if you want to thin your acrylic down, but you don't want to use water. So the advantages to using this over water is when you use water, it's a lot harder to control it. It will really sink into the canvas. This helps it hold its structure a lot more. It's a little bit more of a jelly format. It's a lot easier to blend. It's just a lot nicer for using creating glazes, which is essentially what I'm doing right now. So I'm mixing in various colors of skin tone, or in this case, there's some blue, there's some brown. I'm mixing in those colors with the gloss, and I am using that to add subtleties and shading variances and refine the blending throughout the face. And this makes it so much easier because you have this underpainting that is guiding your structure, and then you can go in on top of that and use the gloss and the glazing to start adding in more subtleties to the skin, like the different reflections of different colors on the skin and things like that. I also obviously use this as time to refine any mistakes that were there, because obviously everything was just an underpainting. And this is where I really start to focus on the actual final result, if that makes any sense. I'm really hoping that I'm explaining myself correctly. You can see here how you can really build up translucency to create really subtle blending with this. You can also kind of use the gloss on its own a little bit to blend some of those colors, especially when they're wet, which is really useful. It also adds a really pretty shine, which makes the acrylics look a little bit more like oils, in my opinion. On the previous painting, they dry a little bit more flat or more satin, and when you add in the gloss, they dry a lot more, obviously, glossy, which is really pretty. Although it does, because I'm painting like flat on a surface, if you see me moving my head around a lot, it's because of the reflection of the lights from where I was, the perspective that I was at. I was trying to like see around them. So then I added in some more details in the nose, especially the nostrils, and also in the eyelashes. I didn't add in too much. Like I didn't want the eyelashes to be super dark. So I kept them a little bit more of like a dark purple color, kind of the same color as her hair, just to keep everything a little bit. I didn't want it to look like too cartoony, even though she has like cartoony proportions. I'm hoping that makes sense. I really tried to go for a little bit more realistic shading. I definitely wanted some kind of like vintagey portrait vibes, and I was just, yeah, I feel like all the glazing made me, I was like, I'm gonna be like a portrait painter back in the day. I don't know. Working on the lips, again, I'm adding a lot more dimension in with these glazes because I can really build things up a lot more subtly, and you can just use like one color with a glaze, when you put it over different colors, will look differently. So if that makes sense. So you don't have to necessarily mix as many colors because you can just use one color and glaze over certain portions of the face to add in like a flush, things like that. Once I was happy with the skin, I went into the hair to add in a lot more dimension to that. And I started with a really dark color, and I made sure to mix the gloss into everything at this point, just so that everything had a consistent finish, whether I was using a glaze or not. And then I added in some still really dark brown, but had a little bit more red to it because I wanted to get some more subtle tones in the actual like shadows of the hair. After that, I went in with highlights, and I'm sorry I missed a little bit of filming here on the footage, but I used 2 different tones of highlights, and basically one of the easiest ways to do this is just don't fully mix your colors. I started with more of like a brown, and half of it was more yellow and half of it was more red, and I just picked from either side, and that way you can get variance in your colors. So you don't need to like fully mix your colors to be perfectly even, because it's okay and actually good to have some variance in your colors. It'll add more variety and just add more interest and realism. Once I was done with the hair, I went into the flowers and just kind of built those up using, this was like pretty standard for me. I kind of was like feeling pretty comfortable at this point, but I didn't use as many glazes as the face. This I kind of just built up and blended as I went while the paint was still wet, just kind of using little feathering techniques. And I will just mix, I will all base on one color, and that way you can more easily mix like the shadows and darks just by adding different varieties of things and like mixing them together. Like I'll constantly change the colors. After that, I had one last thing to paint, and that was her nightgown, which I imagined was this kind of like frilly, like kind of see-through thing. It was kind of hanging off one shoulder, which is why it's only on this side. And I don't know, I tried. The glazing was definitely helpful with here. I used a lot of glazing to try to get the translucent look, and I think I kind of made it work. And then I wanted the background to be a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter, so that her hair had more contrast. And also I wanted to mix in some of that gloss and fill in any patchy spots that were there from the underpainting. So I painted over the background one last time and then added in a little bit of shading to the edges. And that is it. This is what I created with the acrylics from the December 2020 Paletteful Premiere Pack. I hope that you liked this video. Don't forget to check out our website if you'd like to get your own Premiere Pack, and subscribe to see the rest of our videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!